The sound you're hearing now comes from a fuzz pedal that technically shouldn't exist. It came from a designer that disappeared from the pedal scene years ago. I am of course talking about Devi Ever Effects. She built chaos into her circuits. No rules, no safety nets, just pure fuzz. And I found one of her old layouts called the Never Drive. I have no idea if this is going to be genius or a complete meltdown. Let's find out. First, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who subscribed to Hello Sailor Effects Official. I cannot believe how big the channel's got. It just blows my mind. We're at over 9,000 subscribers in 1 year. Over 9,000, that is mental. As a way of saying thank you, I'm going to have 20% off everything in my store for the whole of November. The whole of this month is going to be 20% off everything in HelloSailorEffects.com using code NOV20. November 20, so NOV20. Get you 20% off everything. Before we dive into this build, let's talk about Devi Ever and discuss why she still matters. Back in the early 2000s, her pedals weren't clean, they weren't polite, but they were impressive. They'd scream, they'd splutter, sometimes they'd even cut off mid-riff, but they were absolutely addictive. The Never Drive, the Anima, the Sodameister, oh my god, the Sodameister. Those things just blew my mind at the time. And then she vanished. The website went dark. The circuits all leaked out online. And that's one of the things that we're building today. It's a ghost that refuses to die. And this is what we're working with today. This enclosure, and it looks like I've got 2 foot switches, but I haven't. So I've got my normal stomp switch, great. And then I couldn't find a cool enough single pole, single throw switch for this position here. And I wanted to do something unusual. So I went with this old switch. I think it's a Carlin switch. It is a push switch from an old amplifier. Yeah, I think it looks cool. It'll look good when we get some big knobs on there to offset it. Anyway, this is the enclosure we're going with. You know, Devi Ever's a pretty vintage style effects pedals. I know she doesn't produce pedals anymore. This is all our components. Now, some of this may change because I don't actually know if I'm going to swap bits out or whatever. For example, in our transistor section, it says that we should have MPSA 18s, 2 of them, which I've got. And then it also says to have some 2N2222 alphas. I haven't got them. What I have got is some really old Texas Instruments BC182Ls. They're them cool ones with the paint on the back of them. Everyone knows I love them. You see them in the old fuzz face style pedals. I've got a mixture of some vintage old resistors and some newer resistors. There's no fancy values here or anything of note. And same with the capacitors as well. I've got some of my ceramic box caps and tropical fish caps and some of the LCR 1NF caps. Nothing out of the ordinary there. The best thing about it all is my component tray from Milehouse Studios. Thank you so much, Dan, for giving me this tray. It's amazing. I love it. And I'm going to use it for every single video now. Nice one. The Never Drive is one of Devi's strangest builds. It's a fuzz pretending to be an overdrive, but yet on the verge of collapse. That's the Devi Ever paradox. Everything sounds like it's about to collapse, but somehow it just doesn't. It holds together. When people talk about mojo in old pedals, that's what they're talking about. It's personality. It's something a little bit different. Everyone knows that I prefer tagboard to build my pedals, but I think that Devi will have built her early circuits using Veroboard. I'm trying to capture some of her early boutique vibes and build this on Veroboard, even though everyone knows that I really don't like it. It just feels like the right way to keep her energy alive. Now we're on to marking up the Veroboard. This is going to be a bit of a pain in the backside because the drawing, as you can see on the screen now for the Never Drive, there isn't a plain drawing without all the components on. So I'm just going to have to wing it to see where all the splits are. And it doesn't even tell you how many splits are meant to be in it. I think I can figure it out. So starting off, underneath the 1NF cap in the top row, we can see there's a split there. And that is 10th from the left, but 6th from the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 from the right. We can do that. Again, I'm using my Schneider Max 220S pen, or 220S for my American fellows. These are my favourite pens for marking out any sort of Veroboard. Then in the next row down, we can see that we're in the 12th along from the left. And that leaves 3 holes spare here. So 1, 2, 3 and in. You can see that that split is underneath the 100k resistor in the vertical plane. And then if we follow it along this way to the 7th tag along in the row down. So the 3rd row down, 7th tag along. there's another split there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we miss a row and there's another split. Look at that. Easy work. And then in between them two, we can see that in the 5th row along, there's also a split just below D1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Split there. As ever, I'm just working straight row to row and trying to figure it out. One thing this layout does have is numbers and letters at the side, which is helpful. This row, next row down, we've got 1, 3 holes along. 1, 2, 3. Now, if we go down a row and across one, we have a double. So 1 here and then 1 below it. And if we just double check that, there should be 3 below that on the drawing. 1, 2, 3. Yes, there is. Perfect. Now, I did have my board prepared today. The 1 and F at the top. All I'm going to do is line up my hacksaw blade. My Stanley knife blade. What am I talking about? Words, Joe, words. My Stanley knife blade to go through the hole. Or because I've used the pen that I love, the 220S, I can just look at the back of this and see the ink from the back side, so I don't need to mess about. And then all I have to do is just split the tracks using this in a circular motion. Now, for the Pedal Dive podcast recently, we had Mr. Grimes, Neil on from NRG Effects, and I've watched a few of his videos, and he actually uses the proper tool, which is just like a drill bit with a handle on it, to do this, but I don't. Right, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of them split. There we have all of our holes in place, all the splits in the tracks ready to go. Next up is going to be the links in between. So what I like to do is use my old component legs, and then I'll just straighten them out with my flat nose snips, my Nipex snips, which incidentally enough you can get in the affiliates links in the description. There's a set of links for the US, USA, and a set of links for the UK. Because I've had a few people say the links don't work. Well, they do. It's just you have to get the right one. Then I'll clean it with my Nipex snips as ever. And if we look at our drawing, we can see that there's 3 link wires. Yeah, no, 4 link wires. Ha, what am I talking about? So the first one goes over this double split right here. So we can see our double split. This one goes in the row above, and then it goes over the split and into this hole here, which is 1 from the bottom. So I just make a semicircle or a horseshoe with it. I'll put it into one row above the bottom, and then I'll just bend it until it goes into the other hole. We can push that in and flatten it down. And then what I like to do is take my flat nose snips and then just flatten it down that way. There's that in. And then if we wet the tip, we can simply solder them in place. There's our first link wire in. I'm going to go ahead now and just fit the other 3. And now we're on to the resistors. Devi often used the wrong value resistors in places, but it pushed the transistors to the limit. It really misbiased things, and yet somehow it just seemed to work. Next up is our resistors, which is this tray over here. And the first up on the left hand side, if you take a look at our drawing, we can see is a 10k resistor. Well, I've got these 10k resistors, which are really old ones. I think they are carbon film. Pretty sure they're carbon film. Someone's going to tell me in the comments. I've got the same 2.2 meg resistor in a higher wattage rating for the Circuit 2. I figured it'd be nice to match. So we're going to start off with the 10k. Now the first one we can see goes in a second column along. So here. And it goes in the top row. So this first row here. And then it comes down and it misses 3 gaps. So 1, 2, 3. It doesn't go in. And it goes in next to this split here. Now normally I like to stand them up on end. I like Ibanez and stuff with the old ones. But because this is stretching over so far, it'll actually sit up against the board, no problem. What I don't like is if you try and sit it up against the board, it doesn't quite fit, and part of it's sticking up and stuff. That looks terrible, so I refuse to do that. But this time, I think actually, we can probably just put it in lying flat and it'll fit. There. There we go. And now to solder it in, I get a good solder position so I can get to both legs without my soldering iron fouling anything. Wet the tip. And then what I like to do is attach the solder and the iron to the component together, run them down together, touch the copper, that was terrible, touch the copper and then bring it away. And what that does is it heats the leg up all the way down, so then it's hot enough to receive the solder at the bottom. Because the copper strip's so thin, the copper strip heats up faster than the component leg, especially when you're using the big old thick components that I use. So what I like to do, again, touch the leg with both the solder and the iron, run it down, touch the solder at the bottom to the pad, done. Now that I particularly think that works better with PCBs where the traces are a bit thin. You don't really want to wreck the traces putting too much heat in them and what have you. There's our first component in. Now for the rest of our resistors, I'm just going to go ahead and put them in exactly the same manner. There's all of our resistors now in place. It's looking pretty good. I had to fit the 2.2 meg resistors standing up on end and one of the 100Ks just out of space because of the choices I've made. Basically, I could have probably went with quarter watt resistors and squeezed them in and stuff. Anyway, now onto the diode. So D1, it says, is a 1N5817. Now I haven't got any of them. In fact, I think I actually have in a drawer. Doesn't matter. It's basically a power diode. All it's going to do is cut out the voltage going to the circuit if someone connects it in the wrong way round, i.e. uses up center positive instead of center negative. So I'm just using a 1N4007. It's probably way overkill. It's never going to operate, but whatever, it doesn't matter. The main thing is the grey band around this diode needs to go pointing upwards. So that's the cathode. So the anode is going to point towards 9 volts and the cathode is going to point to the top of the circuit. So where does it go? It goes next to this 100K here. Right above this split is where the non-banded end goes. You miss a hole and then it goes in the top row. Now I'm hoping it's going to fit in over these three. Right, no it doesn't, but this gives me an opportunity to show you. See here the way that that's sort of sitting up but not quite. I think that looks terrible. I hate it when people fit components in like that. So what I'm going to do is I'll stand it up on end so it's standing up. Oh, that's a good point. If we look at our drawing, we can see that right next to it is a 100 microfarad cap and underneath it is a 1NF cap. So for me, the 1NF caps that I've chosen are rather large because they're vintage LCR caps. They're a bit big. So I'm going to try and keep the body of this away from that, which means the banded end is going to go straight down into the Veroboard, and the non-banded end is going to be bent over and pointing down towards our capacitor that we want to avoid. The 100 microfarad caps I've got are really, really small. The JB caps, because I've seen Marcus Reeves use them from Reeves Electro, it is definitely a legend, and I would put my hand in the fire for tonal reasons if that's what he did. When you're soldering diodes, they tend not to like heat as much as other components, like germanium transistors and whatnot. So, but of course you do need to get a good connection, so don't be too scared to solder it. There. So there's all of our smaller resistor-like components in. As we know from all of my previous videos, capacitors are what set the voice of the pedal. And in Devi's case, she seemed to let in a lot of bass. Loads of bass, like too much bass. In fact, her design seemed to hit you in the chest like a thud because of it. But as this is a Hello Sailor Effects pedal, we're using some vintage and mojo components just to spice things up. So these are all our capacitors. There's not that many today. I've got them sorted out, so we've got our electrolytic here, which is our only polar capacitor. The rest of these are just standard capacitors, no problem. These are the aforementioned 1NF LCR caps, and as you can see, they're rather large or rather thick, so that'll be in the way, no doubt. If we go to the bottom here, we've got a 22 NF cap, and that's going to be this tropical fish cap. This the second row from the, the second row from the bottom and one column along. So it basically goes in here, misses where this split is, and then goes to the other side of it. Now, my capacitor is a bit bigger, so I'm probably going to put it in the next hole along. It won't matter because this strip of copper is all joined together. So I'm not strictly sticking to the layout, even though sort of circuit wise it is going in the same connections. I'm just moving it over the hole because I've got a rather large or rather wide capacitor. So it's going in this one here and then into there. And then I'm going to push it down. I don't want it to sit too close to the board because it puts too much stress on the ends of these. And these old tropical fish capacitors, they can get a little bit brittle over time. So I don't want to put any undue pressure on it so it breaks in the future. And then we can wet the tip and give that a solder. There's our first capacitor in place. Now the rest of these we can just fit in. It doesn't really matter which way they go around, apart from this one. This is our 100 UF or 100 microfarad, if you really want to be posh. For some reason the internet hates me saying 100 UF. If we look at it, the little tiny micro next to the farad looks like a U. So I say UF. You know what I mean. And if you don't know what I mean, come on now. I get a lot of proper electrical engineers being pedantic, saying I'm teaching people wrong, I'm the devil, whatever. Don't care. So with these, they are polar. The longer leg is the positive. The shorter leg is the negative. Positive, negative. And we've also got this handy stripe with negative signs on the negative, so we know which way round it goes. And if we look at our drawing, we can see that the positive half goes in the top row and the negative half goes in the next row down. So positive half top row, negative half next row down. In fact, I'm having trouble getting this in next to that resistor, but because there's no splits in our track, I can just move it along one side and try and put it in there. Nope, still won't fit there, so I'm going to have to just bend it out the way of the resistor slightly so it sits down on the board there. Not a problem. And then we can wet the tip and give both halves of this a solder. What I advise you do with this type of thing is to solder one leg and go back and just straighten it out. So the cap's sitting straight, and then you can solder the other leg, and that way you know it's definitely in the right position. There. So I'm going to go ahead now and just fit the rest of the capacitors in exactly the same manner. Now we're on to the transistors. This is where things get a little bit funky. You've got to pay attention to the pinout, so watch carefully. I haven't built many Veroboard pedals that take 4 transistors, so this is interesting. Not quite sure what Devi Ever was going for this one. Anyway, if we look at our drawing, it actually says that we're using 2 MPSA 18s, which is Q1 and 2, and 2 other types of NPN transistors. Here it says a 2N2222, but for me, I'm definitely not going to be fitting a 2N2222. I'm going to be using these, which are BC182Ls, vintage Texas Instrument ones. I'll leave them for a second and we'll come on to Q1 and 2, which is our MPSA 18. Now Q1's in the bottom row here, right in the corner by this split, and we can see that we have our collector, base, emitter is the order that it's in. So I'm going to use my DCA 55 to test it. If you haven't got a DCA 55 and you build pedals, you really should get one. Let me know in the comments if you either have one or don't have one. I'd be interested to know. I know my mate Craze Fandango has just got one, so congratulations to you, mate. Well done. It's analysing, it says it's an NPN silicon transistor. Good, so we know we got the right one. Gives us our pinout, which is what we want. And also, our current gain, that's a whacking 590 HFE. That's massive. There will be no leakage because it's silicon and silicon doesn't leak, which is coincidentally why we switched to it. One of the reasons we switched to it. There's a whole temperature thing and other bits. Right, so the red is our emitter, which is going to go in the bottom row. Red. is our emitter. So it looks like it's going to be facing the same way round as it is on the drawing. No shock there. Blue is our base and the green is our collector. So we don't actually have to swap any legs over, cross any legs or whatever. That's good. And it fits in these bottom 3 holes right next to our 2.2 meg resistor. Brilliant. Now the other one, let's have a look. The other one is Q2. And if we look at our drawing, we can see Q2 is the next one above it. And that goes in the same way round. I'm still, even though I know this is an MPSA 18, from the same batch, same supplier, all of that stuff, I'm still going to test it to make sure that A, I know the HFE, and B, I know the pin out, so it's definitely going in the right way. It seems silly to me if people just fit them straight in, because really you don't know what's going on. You can guess, but, oh, there you go, 592. That's a tight tolerance in my book. Red is the emitter, blue is the base, and green is the collector. So it does indeed go the right way round as per the last one. No surprises there, but it's definitely worth a check. And that goes in the next 3 holes above that. I do like this little row of transistors, or column of transistors. And that's pretty cool. Right, now them 2 are in and are roughly about the same height. I'm going to go ahead and just solder the middle tag on each of them. I say this all the time, but I like to do the middle tag on each transistor first. Then that way you can straighten the transistor up and solder the other 2 tags in. They're not quite the same height. That's really going to annoy me. Oh well. Okay, so I'm going to have to, I just can't. I'm going to have to push this bottom transistor in ever so slightly just to make them the same height. It doesn't matter if the other transistors that are different to these 2 are different heights. My brain just can't handle it. And then we can go ahead and solder all of the legs in. With this being Veroboard, it's quite hard to see and they're all close together, but what are you going to do? There's our Q1 and Q2 fitted. Next we've got Q3 above that and Q4 off to the side here. Now if we go back to our drawing, there's something interesting here. It says for never drive, flip Q3 and Q4 180 degrees. So that's saying turn them round facing the opposite way, i.e. the emitter becomes the collector becomes the emitter. Before I do that, I'm going to go away now and just do a little reading and have a look at a few other layouts and see if it marries up. Because if it doesn't marry up, I'm just going to keep them the same way round on the drawing. Okay, so after much research, I found that the never drive has the transistors, these 2 transistors, flipped 180 degrees to give it like a misbias sound. I've read it's a bit more piercing and stuff like that. I'm not a massive fan of a piercing sound, but I am going to build it to the never drive specs, which means that we are going to flip these round. First of all, before we do, let's figure out what HFE and orientation they are. Because I'm not using the 2N2222 alphas like suggested, and I'm using some vintage BC182Ls Texas Instruments, it's going to be different anyway. It'll be 180 HFE for the 2N2222s. These are actually 265 for this one. So it's a little bit different, but I'm still going to go with it anyway. And if we look at our pinout, red is the emitter, green is the collector, so the collector's in the middle, and blue is the base. Now, if we look at our schematic again, and we look purely at Q4, we can see the collector goes at the top, the base goes in the middle, and the emitter goes to the bottom. So red is the emitter on R1, which means that the flat edge is going to be facing to the right-hand side, which is different to the schematic. We thought it was going to have to. And then the base and the collector swap round. But then if we add on top of that the fact that we've got to flip our transistor, well, let's just sort that out first. So if you flip them round, there's our collector, base, emitter. Now it says to flip it 180 degrees. So we've got to turn it round this way, 180, there you go. So it actually ends up looking like it goes in the same way round as our drawing or our schematic, just because of the flip. Now what I like to do, if I'm going to flip the legs over, is take a small bit of sheathing from our wire, strip it down and put it on the centre leg. Or what is now the centre leg, which is the base. Trust me to choose the BC182Ls that have the legs the wrong way around, just to add that extra bit of pain in there, you know. I don't know, I can't ever do anything the easy way, can I? Right, let's get this ready to go in. There. Now, so normally our emitter would go on the bottom as per the drawing, but for the never drive we flip that 180 degrees, now it goes on the top. And this is going in the second row from the bottom, and then leading on from there in consecutive holes, and the base is going in next to our 100k resistor. And we can just check it on the underside that they're going in consecutive holes, which they are. It's a shame really, because this one's going to be tucked away behind that massive cap, and this is one of the expensive ones, so I don't know. It's not going to stay in there, so I'm going to have to bend the legs over to keep it in there. And like with all of them, what I like to do is solder the centre leg. Yeah, I'll solder that centre leg in, and then I can straighten it up. It is a little bit twisted because the legs are twisted and what have you. There we go. Now we can go ahead and solder the other two legs in. Because these are real old ones, there isn't much leg there to play with in the first place. There. There's our first misbiased misbiased transistor in. Now I know that the same thing's going to happen with this one. So if we face it in the same direction, we know that these two are going to have to swap over. So before I test the legs or test the orientation, I'm just going to flip them over, and we'll put some heat shrink on it now. While heat shrink, it's not heat shrink, but you could use heat shrink, it's just wire sheathing. We'll put some of that in now, just so that then it's all there. When we test it, we can just stick it straight in, because we know we're going to have to flip them over. Oh no, disaster. When I've bent it round, look at that, the legs actually come off. I'm going to have to see if I've got another one. If not, I'll have to find a replacement. And disaster, I haven't got another BC182L. Unfortunately, with the leg snapping on that one, it's through a spanner in the works. But what I have got is a BC183LB, which is much more of a fuzz facey type transistor. So I think the pinout on these is the opposite way around, so don't have to cross anything over, but we'll double check, and we'll also see what HFE we're getting. I'm still not convinced that I'm going to like this flip transistor, spiky, I don't know, octave type fuzz, but there you go. So it's telling us it's an NPN silicon, gives us our pinout, which we'll come back to. Now the current gain on these is 300, so it is much more, which isn't exactly what the original was, the original circuit, so maybe not what we're looking for, but I'm going to go with it anyway. The red is the base. Oh, there you go. We are going to have to flip them over. The green is the collector, and the blue is the emitter. Brilliant. So red is the base, and green is the collector. Them two are going to be flipped round. And it's going to go in that way round. And if we look at our drawing, it shows us that the emitter goes at the top and the collector at the bottom. But because we've got to flip our transistors, we're going to flip that 180 degrees and then put it in. There's all of our transistors in place, ready to go. I've actually cleaned the bottom of the board. Next up is going to be adding in all the wires. If we take a look at our drawing, we can see on the right hand side, there's only two wires, volume and volume. Volume 1 and volume 3. Obviously with volume 2 going to the output. On the opposite side, there's plenty of wires. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wires. So that makes 10 in total. All I'm going to do is take 10 lengths of wire and cut them. Now I know this is way too much wire, but it's just what I do. Then once I've got them all together, all I'm going to do is just strip the ends and give them a twist, and then we can tin them ends and fit them directly to the board next to where all of the labels are. So for example, there'll be a ground wire going to the ground. These are the knobs that we're going to choose from today. Oh, come on, brown on brown. First up, you've got these Neve style knobs. They are Bakelite. What do we think? I don't know. I do feel like they mould into the background a little bit too much. Don't know, not sure. Or we have some clon knobs. One that I haven't released enough to go on there, but there you go. I kind of like them. They stick out. I love the clon shaped knobs, and this is big enough for them to fit on. The classics. Brown cupcake knobs. Can you ever go wrong with brown cupcakes? I like them. Not sure they're big enough because there's, you know, a lot of space on this. And last but not least, we've got some clon knobs in the maroon colour. Tackaware, Bakelite, whatever. I really like them, and I do think that maybe I'm going to go with them. But we'll see. I'd like to know in the comments, which knobs would you have chosen if this was your pedal? Or is there a different style that you prefer that you think I should have chosen? Fitting the circuit into the pedal. I'm going to fit it in the centre here because there's loads of space in here. But what am I going to do to actually attach it? Now I get this all the time, and usually my answer would be use some of these sticky foam pads and steel reinforced epoxy. But I'm getting a lot of people lately saying, but how do you do it, Joe? What do you do to fit them? So I figured we'd go into detail. So I like to use these sellotape pads. If you're interested, there'll be an affiliates link, Amazon affiliates link in the description. Should you want to buy the same ones that I use, I couldn't build pedals without them. So I like to put two together to raise the board off. And then I like to put two sets of pads in there, so 4 pads in total. The steel reinforced epoxy, I like to use JB Weld. It says that it does high pressure systems and holds it in. It doesn't, but it does work for this. Works a lot better than normal epoxy. Super glue's corrosive if you've ever tried that. And you could bolt it down, but who wants to have 2 big whacking bolts going through their pedal? Maybe someone who's a touring guitarist would prefer that, or they want to take it out and do some mods maintenance. Fine, whatever. This is how I stick my circuits down. Bring on the arguments, internet. So you mix it all up, it becomes a nice grey colour. Do you know what it is, right? I absolutely love this stuff, this JB Weld stuff. It reminds me of Op Fortis #1, which was back in 2021, where it was the UK's first carrier strike group with the Queen Elizabeth carrier out to the Far East, the South China Sea. And we used this stuff to fix all sorts on board. Well, anyway, because we were miles away from home, no one coming to save us. And this stuff got used liberally throughout the ship. Let me tell you, I bet there's still people on HMS Kent now pulling things apart and finding where to put this stuff in. Right, once it's mixed up to a grey uniform shape, we take the bottom of our pedal, which I've already run my Stanley blade down each groove to make sure that there's no contact between them. We take our pad, which will stick to the bottom of this, but all I'm going to do is put a tiny, it's way too much, a tiny little blob on the bottom of the pad. It doesn't conduct. I know it's steel reinforced epoxy, but it does not conduct. I've tried. And then I stick that pad to the bottom of our circuit. Make sure it's touching in all areas. As I say, these do stick down without it. And if you ever buy some pedal kits and stuff like the GMR ones that they used to sell on eBay, they normally come with these sticky foam pads, maybe a different type, like a thicker type. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But I just like to do the steel reinforced epoxy thing. And then stick that down. Great. Now it becomes the messy bit really, I suppose. Take that off, so then we've got the sticky side up, and we're going to put another blob. But what I do is I put a blob through the centre and join both halves of it together. No other reason than I think it adds a bit of stability, maybe not. And then I'll put another little bit out on the edge here. If I had to get this circuit up to do some repairs on it, you absolutely still can. but it's strong enough that it's not going to come off from a couple of whacks or whatever on tour. Then I'll line this up over the top of my pedal. Remember, when I touch it down, the sticky part of these pads is going to stick to the enclosure, so it's there once you've stuck it in. Sometimes, if there isn't a lot of space in the enclosure, I'll sit the circuit off to one side so that then there's room to run the wires, but there's loads of room in here, so we'll be able to get one wire and loom in no problem. Fit the circuit, press it down, try not to bend any of your components. Another thing to do before you start fitting the circuit, after you've messed with this steel reinforced epoxy, is just check your fingers, make sure you haven't got any on there. I can't tell you how many times that I've had a bit of epoxy on my finger, touched the top of my pedal and rubbed it into the finish or into the fabric. Now that's in place, it's going nowhere. We've got our wires sticking off either side, ready to be wired in. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab the LED. Reason being is I can add just a dab of epoxy onto the LED and stick it in. Because of the way that I fit the LEDs, they get soldered straight to the jack and then stick in the LED hole. So I don't really need to put any epoxy in there. But what I am going to do is just put a small dab of super glue. And I know John Space Wolf, I'm very sorry mate, he's going to tell me off for using super glue because it can be corrosive, but it is only a tiny dab. What's a little bit of super glue between friends, eh? Right, now the longer leg is going to go into the 9-volt jack because that is the positive. I'm just going to slide it through the center one because that's the tallest, and then I just sit the LED in the hole that I've drilled out for it, and then we can solder that half of the LED into the jack. It's not going to go anywhere then. I mean, you really don't need to put any glue on it whatsoever because the solder joint will just hold it where it needs to be. If I snip off the excess there. And of course, there's no hole on the top because we have our LED mounted underneath the fabric. Right, now to start wiring, we always start top left and work our way across because that's how I read. So we start this side, and this side actually is the snake's wedding. So top left is a ground. Now for our ground, I'm going to run this up to our center tag on our DC jack. I'm going to run a wire between these two earth connections on our input and output jacks. And this will attach from the center jack here up and attach to these. So then we'll have our earth of our input and output and our DC supply all joined together and joined to the circuit. I'll also take a wire from one of these, run it down. I think I'm going to choose this side here for my wire and loom, mainly because we've got all these wires in a way anyway. So our wire and loom will come round here, up the back of our switch and go through this back pin here, which is the center pin on the closest row to me. And then a bare wire will go from that pin to here, which is the input of our... Nope, that's a lie. It won't. It's not going to go to that center pin. It's going to come round and it's going to go to the center tag of our 3-pole double throw switch. And that's going to allow us to either earth or LED to make it turn on, or earth the input to the circuit to make sure it's not noisy. There's our earths in place. Next, I'm just going to go down the line on this left hand side, wiring in one at a time. Next is going to be the 9-volt. As we can see on our drawing, 9-volt is in red. Then after that, we've got our input. Our input's going to come round, up back through the back of this ponytail and to the front left hand pin, which is our input, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to go through the whole thing now, wiring them in. There's our input, and the next wire after that is going to be, if we look at our drawing, the TP/AE switch 1. What is that? That is our switch. I was just thinking I have no idea which way round this switch goes. So I better measure it before I start measuring the wires out. You know, is them two a switch? Is it them two? I just don't know. So I'm going to take my Fluke 101, flick it round to ohms, which is going to test continuity. Now, right now that's open circuit. You can see it's 0 and it's got the meg ohm range, which means there's no connection. If I join these two together, we get 1.5, 1.4 ohms. That's the resistance between the two pins and the wires. Now, if we go to these two here, no connection. If we go to these two here, no connection, no connection. What about these two? There we go. Like 12 ohms, 3 ohms. So them two are joined together. These two are open circuit. And then when we press our switch, that should change round. These two are open circuit. And these two join together. So this is a switch and this is a switch. So I'm going to run my switch wires, of which there's two. One to here and one to here. And use this half of the switch. I mean, I could use this half of the switch. It doesn't really matter. But I'm just going to keep it all on this side. There's all of our wires on our board wired up. You can see the snake's wedding's gone now. When we get some cable ties in there, that's going to look pretty good. Right, what's next? Next is the signal. So we've got our input jack, or sorry, our input wired in. Next is our output, which is this front right hand pin. The wire is going to come round the ponytail and go to lug 2 of our 100k volume pot. Great. What else have we got on this? Well, our input jack, which is on the left hand side now, remember, because the pedal's upside down, so you know I always mix that up. Anyway, left hand side, there's our input. From this tag here, we're going to come round our wiring loom up and into the center left pin. Then I'm going to add a link wire between these two back pins, because that's our bypass loop. Then onto the output, which is this side center, it's going to come round and go into this jack here for our output. There's our input and output wires in place. That's everything now. The only thing left to do is to add in a current limiting resistor coming from the center pin, center forward pin of our 3-pole double throw switch, and a wire coming from the earth connection of our LED, which I've bent over, which means the LED might not work. Ha! Well done, Joe, but we'll see. So I'll hook and loop a wire around this leg here, solder on, snip the excess off. Then I'll run the wire round and we'll put our LED current limiting resistor coming from this tag hanging over here, and then our wire can just come up and intersect it like we normally do. And now for the really cool trick that any of you guys who are salvaging parts will really find useful. So when I've been building this, I wanted to use this 100k potentiometer because it's big, it looks good, I wanted to use it. It's a linear potentiometer, which is a B taper, but the circuit calls for a log taper, so it calls for the audio taper. How can we make this B taper more like an audio taper? Well, we can do that with a simple resistor. Let's take a look at this drawing here. We can see that the black line is a linear taper, and resistance on the left hand side here, as we increase the resistance, we move the position percentage of the audio. We move the position of the audio to the right hand side between 10 and 100. If you look at our log curve, we can see that it starts off really fast, like it really moves at the bottom, and then it carries on its normal taper up at the top. And inverse log is the other way around, right? So because our ear perceives sound in an odd way, audio taper or log taper, it kind of works in a weird thing where all of it happens at once and then not a lot afterwards. It's sort of why when you roll off your guitar's volume and you just take it down from 10 to 8, you get that massive clean-up effect all at once, and that's because of the taper of the pot. So how can we trick this potentiometer into doing it? Well, we can use a 22k resistor. I mean, you could use a 10k, but it's much more extreme, and dependent on the value of the resistor, you know, if we use a lower resistor, we're going to lower the value of our pot, and I don't want to do that too much. So if I take a 22k resistor like this one here and solder it between lug 1, which is going to ground, and then lug 2, which is our wiper, we can change half of the potentiometer's sweep, basically, and thus making it really take effect in the first part of the movement, just like our log audio curve. And so I'm going to be using this 22k resistor, and all I'm going to do is bend it over like this. I'll snip the legs to the same length, And then if I could get in here, it'd be really handy to poke the resistor through the holes that are there because they're big enough. But I just can't get in there because there's so much in the way and our switch is massive. Yeah, I don't want to burn it or cause any damage into the circuit because, to be fair, I didn't really plan on doing this. But I figured it'd be something cool to show you guys, just in case you're salvaging pots and you find a really cool linear potentiometer and you want to use it in a lug function. So I'll tack solder it in to the lug 1. I know tack soldering isn't really a thing, but all I'm doing is just having a bit of wet solder on my tip, touching it together with the component and the lug just to hold it in place while I position the resistor so the other leg is right up against pin 2. Then I can solder that in like so. And that one is soldered in properly. Now once that solder is dry, not wet, gone off, stop being fluid, we can move on to pin 1 and just give that a proper solder to hold it in place. There we go. Now we've effectively changed our linear potentiometer to behave a little bit more like a log potentiometer. I know the electronics guys are going to hate me for that because I've dropped the value of the pot by a tiny bit. Whatever. But at least now it will behave in that fashion. So when we lower it, it'll have a much smoother sweep than it did before. And here it is, the sound sample. But why do I get the feeling that this fuzz is going to hit me like a punch in the face? Before we get to the sound sample, I'd just like to say thank you again to everyone who subscribed. We're over 9k subscribers now. It is mental. And to say thank you, remember there's 20% off all of Hello Sailor Effects pedals if you go to hellosailoreffects.com and use code NOV20. NOV20. That'll get you 20% off everything onto the sound sample. And now, my clean tone. Listen to that! It definitely cleans up. Now, let's see what the switch does. I almost feel like I want to be playing a bit of the old. Sounds very dark. A lot of bass that I was talking about before, you can hear it coming through. Let's see what it sounds like with fake red. This is going to be interesting. Here's my clean tone. What is that? It's much more noisy. Neck pickup. volume back. Come on. Well, that was interesting. Definitely not the circuit that I would go for myself. It's not my sort of thing, but it did sound interesting. I'd like to know what you think in the comments. Also, if you watched the video this far, thank you so much. Type in Devi Ever in the comments and let me know that you watched it this far. Let me know if you've ever owned any of their pedals or what you think of the brand. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this video.